Okay, well, we have a full program today, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the May 18th meeting of the Overland Park Rotary Club. I am Jamia Haynes, your current club vice president. I'm filling in for Janae as her schedule is busy these days. I want to welcome you all here on our online meeting, and thank you for your flexibility and patience with these different kind of meetings and gatherings that we're doing these days. So we'll hop over to Will next, and again, thank him for coordinating these Zoom meetings. Will, do you want to tell us about the setup today?
Sorry.
There we go.
Thanks. Too many darn meetings. So basically, nothing's changed from last week. We will be, if you're not speaking or presenting, please make sure you're on mute. And then, our program is a similar format to previous. And I will let Jamia take that away, and I'll share the screen real quick about the upcoming agenda and presenter.
Very good. Thank you, Will. Okay, we will move on to the Pledge of Allegiance, and today I believe Mr. Greg Musil is going to lead us. Greg?
Hello. Can you hear me, Jamia?
Yes.
All right. I ran outside and got my flag off the garage because I didn't know we'd have a flag symbol. So if you would place your hand over your heart and help us support our country, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, we'll move on to visitors. Do we have any visitors today?
Jamia, yes, we have a visitor. Overland Park Council member Logan Healy has joined us at my invitation. He's been interested in joining our club, and then of course everything kind of changed. So we're glad Logan is here. Thanks for being here, Logan. Looks like you are appropriately masking, and it looks like you're here from work. Logan works at Harvesters.
Yeah, and thanks for the invitation, Janae. I'm looking forward to the meeting, and yes, I am at work, so out of respect for my colleagues, I'm masked up while I might be talking and otherwise. But thanks for allowing me to be here.
Great. Glad you're here.
Yeah, welcome, Logan. We're glad you're joining us today. We'll move on to club or committee updates. I'm not sure if there's a foundation update today. Tim, are you with us? Okay, maybe no update today from the foundation.
Well, Janae, I'm sorry. Having trouble getting off mute. I thought Tim would be on. We're having a foundation meeting today at 1 o'clock if anybody would like to join us. So it'll be a Zoom meeting. We'll be considering the budget, and we've got upcoming elections with the annual meeting at the end of June following the club's annual meeting. So we'll be asking for people who are interested in serving on the foundation board. Look for further word on that in our weekly announcements. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, we'll move on to club member updates. I saw that, and I saw Donna. You're with us today, aren't you, Donna?
Yes, and I want to thank everybody for the beautiful flowers that came right after I had physical therapy and I needed a little boost. So thank you, everybody.
Well, good. We're glad to have you with us and glad to see your smiling face. I noticed also that Dick Bond continues on therapy, so we'll keep him in our prayers as well. Are there any other updates anyone would like to share? We will move on to our speaker today, so we have plenty of time for that. Today our speaker is 3rd District Congresswoman Representative Sharice Davids, and I will turn the floor over to Janae to give her an introduction.
Thank you, Jamia. And I see that Sharice has joined us, as well as one of her staff people, Coletta Hummel. So welcome. We're so glad you're here with us today. It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Representative Sharice Davids as our speaker. Sharice has served as the U.S. Representative from Kansas' 3rd Congressional District since January 2019. And many of you may already know some about Sharice's background, including that she was raised by a single mother who served in the Army for 20 years. In fact, I hadn't realized this, but Sharice was born in Germany, I assume while her mother was stationed there. That's pretty cool. And after Sharice graduated from Leavenworth High School, she worked her way through Johnson County Community College and UMKC before earning a law degree from Cornell Law School. And then in 2016, she served as a White House Fellow in the Department of Transportation, which was quite fortuitous since she now, that's one of the committees that she serves on in the House. A couple of interesting things. When Representative Davids was sworn into the 116th Congress, she became one of the first 2 Native American women to serve in Congress. However, she is also only the 2nd Native American to represent Kansas in Congress. The first was Charles Curtis, who in the early 1900s served in the House, Senate, and then as vice president under Herbert Hoover. So it's been too long. So we're glad you're there, Sharice. As I mentioned, Representative Davids sits on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and as well as the Small Business Committee, and she is a resident of Overland Park. On a personal note, I first met Sharice in early 2018 when we were both attending the same candidate training workshop by the Greater Kansas City Women's Political Caucus. And so if any women are thinking of running for office, I'd highly recommend that training. It obviously worked for both of us. So with that, Sharice, thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Janae. I appreciate the intro. It's good to see all of you today virtually. I appreciate the fun fact as well. So just so everybody knows, I met Coletta at that same training. It was a really awesome training, 1-day training. Now here I am, a member of Congress. You too can do this. I mean, I'm not kidding. It's true. So one of the things I wanted to do was, first of all, say thank you for letting me pop into your meeting here and spend some time talking to you all today. And especially during what is really an unprecedented and difficult time for so many people, not just in our community, but in our state and frankly, globally, whether it's our schools, our businesses, the nonprofits, and folks who are really just trying to, are the workers and frontline folks. I appreciate you all practicing the distancing while still figuring out ways to stay connected. I've been talking to lots of people all over the district from a variety of sectors to find out how the coronavirus pandemic has been impacting people. And I think that it's really clear that in this unprecedented time that one of the ways that we're going to get through this is by really helping each other out, doing this together. And that's whether we're looking at trying to figure out ways to support people. I was on earlier when Logan was getting introduced, and Harvesters does some amazing work. I know there's lots of folks who are just really stepping up to try to figure out ways to help the folks who are getting hit really hard with this. I mean, it's a demonstration really of how resilient and amazing our community is. So I know that we're going to be able to get through this. It's going to be really hard. But we're going to be there for each other during, these hard days and weeks and frankly months. It's been months that we've been doing this. So Coletta is on here today. I don't know which box she is right now, but Coletta is on here today. She's part of our team, and I just want to make sure everybody knows that our team, our office is here. We're still working really hard, trying to figure out ways to continue our constituent services as effectively as possible. And, so if there are things that you need assistance with, particularly navigating the federal bureaucracy, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office. We also are, just so you know, trying to keep as many people up to date as possible. We've got information, resources that we know people are really looking for now more than ever. So we created a web page, a page on our website, a coronavirus resource center, if you will. It's at davids.house.gov/coronavirus. And Coletta, do you mind popping that into the chat? I would do it, but I'll keep talking and sit here messing around trying to figure out how to chat everybody. But on this resource, at this resource center, you can find things like the latest public health information from whether it's the CDC or local public health resources. There's also links there to connect you with the things like disaster aid for the small business owners, accessing unemployment insurance or food assistance. There's a lot of things on there. And because I know that this is a group of folks who are very involved and engaged civically, and with our local and state governments too, if there's something that you think needs to be on that page, please don't hesitate to let us know. We're updating that thing basically every day. So I'll do a bit of an update about what's going on at the federal level, or at least the things that I've been working on. And then I'm not sure if we're going to do Q&A. Hopefully we'll have some time for that if possible. So at the federal level, I have now voted in favor of 4 bipartisan pieces of legislation that provide relief directly related to the coronavirus pandemic. The first piece was an $8.3 billion emergency response package. That bill implemented a lot of vital measures, but I'd say probably the most notable was in the Small Business Administration, allowing for or enabling an estimated $7 billion in low-cost economic injury disaster loans, also called EIDL. So that was aimed at small business relief. The second bill that we passed was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, also bipartisan support. So the president has signed all 4 of these bipartisan bills. You know, they hit his desk and he signed them to try to get these things implemented as quickly as possible. That bill was, I'd probably say the most notable piece out of that bill was the emergency paid sick leave. You know, as many as 87 million U.S. workers don't have access to emergency paid sick leave. So this helped provide full-time employees with 2 weeks of paid time off. I'd say probably like the biggest thing about that is that the number of people who didn't have access to paid time off, when we're asking people to please stay home if you're sick or if you're not feeling well, I think it was important for us to make sure that people weren't having to choose between their paychecks and their health or the health of the people around them. So the third piece of legislation, which I think is probably the one that most people have hear about often, is the CARES Act, which is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. Lots of acronyms in DC. So the CARES Act, and that one has been probably in the news the most because of, first of all, it was a $2 trillion relief package. And it was designed to help keep our economy, and particularly our small businesses afloat during this kind of unprecedented economic uncertainty. I'll just call it uncertainty. And, you know, that bill, of course, it was like any big bill, it was far from perfect, but it did provide immediate relief to medical professionals who are working on the front lines, working families. It had unemployment provisions in there. It had small business provisions in there. It had some of the other notable things I would say are the direct rebates or payments to folks. And again, bumpy rollout on some of the things, but you know, the improvements to unemployment benefits, there was that bill is for the additional $600 per week for 4 months was included in that bill. That's where the Paycheck Protection Program came into play, and we got that passed. And I'll talk more about that actually. There was also some accountability measures in there to try to put up some guardrails to make sure that while things are getting implemented very, very quickly with tons of dollars behind them, that the money is actually going to the folks who need the relief the most. I think that is a conversation that includes the Paycheck Protection Program is one of those things that touches on both of the direct relief and also the oversight needs. The Paycheck Protection Program, probably most people know about it, but just to be on the safe side, that's the program for small business owners that the program was really geared to try to get money into the hands of really
our small business owners. I know there were lots of news reports about folks not being able to access the program. I know our office heard a ton about that. If you're still in that position, I would ask, please reach out. Coletta's on here right now. Send her a message and we'll get somebody on the phone with you to talk about that. But that program, it ran out of funding within just a couple of weeks of being implemented. And I think that it wasn't just me, but I saw very, very quickly that we were going to need to get more funding into that program, calling on the leaders of both the House and the Senate and both parties to figure out a way for us to get more money into that program. And we were able to do that. We passed a fourth bill that got $310 billion into the Paycheck Protection Program. In the fourth bill, we were also able to basically try to ensure that really truly small businesses had access to the funding. So we had $30 billion of that funding was reserved for community-based lenders, small banks, credit unions, smaller credit unions, and then $30 billion for the medium-sized banks and credit unions. So some of our regional banks that we have right here that were actually doing a really good job of getting the Paycheck Protection Program funding to small businesses were then allocated additional funding because they ran out so quickly. And then that fourth bill had two other things in it that I think are really worth noting. One was $75 billion in resources for hospitals and frontline workers, because our hospitals are getting hit really hard right now. And then $25 billion for testing and for a national testing strategy. Because I think that from all the conversations I've been having, whether it's with FEMA or our state and local health department folks and even hospitals, is that a national testing strategy is really going to help us move forward and make sure that we're opening things up in a safe way, and that we don't have regions being pitted against each other for whether it's personal protective equipment or the actual testing supplies. So I think that was a really important piece of that fourth bill that I haven't seen as much of that being covered in the news. So I like to make sure that folks know about that. And then, I think that probably one of the things that folks have seen recently is I just went to DC not that many days ago. Every day feels like a week. I don't know if you all are experiencing that time warp. I have consistently focused on trying to make sure that, especially in this time of a global pandemic, that we're trying to figure out ways to move forward in a way that is not just bipartisan, but I think that that's an important piece, but also very much focused on making sure that we're addressing the needs of our state and local governments. I am, of course, a big, even in my intro, without me even having to say it, the infrastructure piece is very, very important to me. And then, improving our healthcare, access to healthcare. And I've been a big proponent of things like expanding Medicaid and trying to open up the ACA marketplace to make sure that people can get onto plans. And I'm sure we'll probably talk a bit more about all this stuff. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of priorities that need to be reflected in any piece of upcoming legislation that we work on. I think that these last four bills that we passed fairly quickly and that got signed by the president demonstrate that, the House and the Senate can come together and get stuff done. My hope is that we can keep working on that. And in fact, we just passed a provision to ensure that we can do proxy voting and hold hearings remotely. And I think that will help us really cultivate some of the provisions and legislation that we need to pass to be able to just get as much relief to people as possible. I think I already mentioned this earlier, but I like to reiterate it. Please, if folks have issues around just like navigating the federal government, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office. If there are things that you perceive as really important priorities that should be included in coronavirus relief packages, don't hesitate to reach out. And then even if it's not coronavirus related, but just kind of, the broad stuff, life is still happening for a lot of people being impacted by coronavirus, but there's a lot of stuff that we still, as federal legislators, that I know I need to know about. So I just like to make sure to put that plug in. Please don't hesitate to reach out to our office. And with that, I think, do I turn it back over to Janae, or?
I think Jamia is going to regulate if there are questions for you, Sharice.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Jamia.
Hi, yes, thank you, Representative Davids. Are there any questions?
Hi, I appreciate your time, Sharice. I appreciate your availability. If you'll bear with me, I'm going to tell you a story for a minute about some really disparate reactions in my own family about some of the legislation, because you're on the Small Business Committee, which I think is hugely important right now. And my question really involves the monitoring and the accountability of our tax distributions that you guys have voted on so far. So in my family, I have 5 people that have been, well, we've all been impacted, but 5 whose bottom lines have been impacted. I have 2 children, and they're both married. Of those 4 adults, 3 of them have lost work and been told, I think, not to expect those jobs to return. 2 of them live in Kansas, and we have some relief and some unemployment that has started, and that's great. The 2 in Missouri are still in cyber netherworld trying to make that work. And that's not your problem. Another member of the family owns a small business, employs about 85 people, between 50 and 100, and has a good relationship with his banker and his accountant. They happen to have a product that's in a lot of demand right now. Everybody's busy. Everybody's employed. The payroll was never in question, but they applied for and were granted a comfortable PPP distribution. It was 7 figures, when in fact, none of those small business workers would have lost income over it. Now, I don't know how they monitor the need of those checks, but I'd like to take some of that 7-figure check and give it to my children. But I don't know what accountability has been put in place to retroactively go back and say, well, these distributions that we made to these small businesses, were they in fact in danger of layoffs or not?
That's a really great question. I kind of wish we had had this conversation at this time last week, because last week on Wednesday or Thursday, we actually had a virtual forum, I think we've been calling them, because we didn't quite have the authority yet to call them hearings. So they weren't part of the official congressional record, but we heard from the Inspector General at the Small Business Administration. So within each department, there's an Inspector General that operates as the kind of investigator, if you will, that sits outside of the direct authority. Like they are supposed to be there to investigate exactly how our tax dollars are being spent, exactly how our programs are being implemented. When we heard from him, they basically, first of all, there were oversight and guardrail type provisions in the CARES Act. But when it came to the PPP, I think that one of the places where we didn't see enough oversight and accountability and transparency measures, I think transparency is probably one of the bigger words that should be included in this. And so when we added the additional round of funding in the 4th bipartisan bill that we passed, we started to include more of the requirements for tracking and data, and also included additional requirements for the guidance that needed to exist. So one of the problems and why it was hard for some people to get access to the program is because there was very little guidance from the SBA or Treasury. I think sometimes people, I've described it as the decision-making was left to the banks. And from what I heard locally, and if folks have some different experiences, I'd love for you to reach out to our office and let us know. We had a lot of regional and smaller banks in our area that were able to much more quickly process loans and get through loans for our small businesses because they had existing relationships with our small business owners. But they still were a bit concerned about the fact that they didn't have exactly the kind of guidance that they really would want to see to make sure that no one gives a loan that shouldn't have been given. Nobody, like, if anything, consistency and predictability for a small business owner is so important, because you don't want to apply for a program and then find out 2 weeks later that the guidance has changed, or guidance that wasn't there was now being implemented retroactively. And that has been the biggest concern from both the community banks that I've talked to and the small business owners, is that they aren't sure because it's taken so long for the guidance to come out. So that's something that, those are things that we've been pushing on. And it's also stuff that we've been asking to be implemented. I'm looking at legislation to increase the transparency in the Paycheck Protection Program, partly because of some of the reports that we've seen that very large organizations and also very well-resourced organizations were able to access these programs, and what appears to be some very well-connected, politically connected companies were able to access the programs, and that's not how it's supposed to work. And so, you know, we're looking at legislation to address some of that right now, but in the last package, we did also include additional requirements for guidance and that sort of thing. Small Business Administration for sure has been on, you know, it's a stress test. They did as much in loans as I want to say in 14 days, they did as much as they would have done in a year or something like that. The metric is pretty astounding, but that also doesn't mean that we shouldn't expect to know where our dollars went. Been hosting conversations with small business owners where we can find out exactly what the sticking points are for them. One of the things that I brought up to the Inspector General was the lack of guidance and the concern of small business owners that they might be penalized after taking the Paycheck Protection Program money. That, I think, is probably one of the biggest concerns of folks is just how they make sure that that doesn't happen to them. So it's something that we've been working on. I appreciate you bringing it up. I know the reason it's a long answer, I feel like, is because it has been such a huge topic of conversation with small business owners and frankly the bankers here in the 3rd District.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Jamea, this is Jeff. May I? Sharice, in light of the pandemic experience for the country, do you foresee any energy or enthusiasm for reviewing and trying to develop a universal health plan?
So one of the things I would say, there's a couple of answers to that. One is I have seen a lot more movement in terms of trying to figure out ways to expand, like really expand access. One of the things that was in the CARES package but didn't end up making it into the final bill was Medicaid expansion. I've been pushing really hard for that. Another thing that was included, or another thing that I think we need to do is open up the ACA marketplace so that people can get on there and get onto a plan, and then protecting against people even having to lay anyone off, so that if what they have is an employer sponsored plan, that they're able to access that. During the actual coronavirus pandemic, one of the other things that we've been looking at, and so far the testing aspect has been included in our previous legislation. It's, making sure that everybody, no matter if you have insurance or don't have insurance, that people don't have to pay for the testing, because the last thing we need is for somebody to not get tested or keep going to work when they have it, because that's literally, it could save tons of people's lives for us to make sure that people get tested and are able to stay home. Right now, I think that those are probably the biggest moves that we're seeing in terms of access to healthcare, access to testing, and making sure that people are able to really do things that are going to be in the public health interest. And I don't know what the next package is, what the next bipartisan package we're going to be able to come to is going to look like. I think it's going to have state and local funding in it. I also think it's probably going to have, my hope is that it has some infrastructure stuff in it, but then I also hope that we can see more specifically healthcare related, just expanding our healthcare system so that people aren't struggling so much to access quality healthcare. And we also need to make sure that our healthcare workers and the people in hospitals have personal protective equipment to make sure that when people are showing up, that everybody is safe.
Jamia, we've got a couple questions in the chat.
It looks like actually this has to be Representative Davids' last question. She has a busy schedule, so she needs to move on. Coletta, I'm guessing that you could send us answers to the questions that are in the chat. Would that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. We'd appreciate that. Well, thank you for being here with us and sharing all the helpful information with us, Representative Davids.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully we can do this again.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you.
I mean, hopefully at some point, I mean, I know it's going to be a little while, but I will look forward to seeing you all in person at some point.
Very good. Well, thank you.
And I hope everybody's able to stay safe and healthy during all of this.
You too.
Thank
See you all later. Thank you.
Well, we don't Memorial Day. We'll spend that day honoring the men and women who died serving in the military. We'll move on to wrap up the meeting and recite the four-way test. Greg, can you lead us in that?
Jamia, can I just make one comment before we finish?
Sure.
Just to note, we do have, in addition to the 1 o'clock foundation meeting this afternoon, we also have a club board meeting tomorrow morning at 9:30. And one of the things we're going to be discussing is where do we go from here? And so if anyone has any particular thoughts, please feel free to email or call me, because I welcome your input. Frankly, I don't foresee us rushing back into in-person meetings at this time, but I do think we need to think about what does Overland Park Rotary look like down the road? What are some things that we can learn from this experience to strengthen our club? And what are some things that we want to continue to do or change? So please, if you have any thoughts, feel free to reach out to me or any of the board members and share those before our meeting tomorrow. But it will be an ongoing conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, President Janae. And we also have a book club meeting tomorrow, I think from 8 to 9 in the morning. So that's also on the schedule for tomorrow. All right, we're ready for the four-way test. Greg, are you ready to lead us? I'm not seeing Greg on there. Okay, how about I lead us? Of the things we think
say
or do,
is it the truth? Is it fair to
all
concerned?
Will it
build
goodwill
for
better
better
relationships?
friendships?
Will it be beneficial
Beneficial
to
to
all
all concerned.
Well, thank you for everyone for joining us again today. It was good to see you. Have a great week. Have a good long Memorial weekend and stay well.